I wanted to welcome everyone again. This is an exciting session indeed. We're still in a cycling month, and we are discussing how to get to cycling for all and what are the different stakeholders doing to advocate, design, and implement cycling for everyone. And of course, especially the underserved and underrepresented groups who are typically not part of the drawing table around inclusive active transport. ITDP's Cycling Cities campaign continues to bring new topics and speakers to raise the awareness and capacity around cycling. And through today's discussion, we want to highlight that cycling can really be crucial to those who are typically not seen, perceived, or allowed to be cyclists, but who could perfectly be if cities think outside of the box. So we'll hear the perception on cycling from an advocate, an organization, and a decision maker. So with that, let me introduce to you today's panel, starting with the moderators, two of my colleagues from ITDP who helped shape the discussion. Here with us is Lorena Freitas, who is a travel demand manager, management coordinator at ITDP Brazil. Lorena is a transport engineer with an interdisciplinary interest around gender and socioeconomics in urban mobility. Hello, Lorena. We also have Kasih Sabandar, who is an inclusive urban planning associate from ITDP Indonesia. She has experience in cycling initiatives through the gender, equity, disability, and social inclusion perspective that ITDP Indonesia is leading. Hello, Kasih. We also have amazing panel, including in order of appearance, Kay Inkle, who is campaigns and policy manager for Wheels for Wellbeing, a disabled people's cycling organization who campaign for equal access to cycling, active travel, and multimodal journeys for disabled people. Hello, Kay. Good seeing you. Next, we'll hear from Hila Barner, who is a program associate with Streets for Kids team at Global Designing Cities Initiative. She will talk about some of the programs and approaches GDCI has been spearheading around cycling. Hello, Hila. And finally, we will hear from Deyanira Avila Moreno, Director for the Bogota and Cundinamarca Regional Mobility Agency. Prior to that, she was the Secretary of Mobility for the city of Bogota, and she will talk about some of the great strategies Bogota has applied to increase cycling among women, caregivers, and kids. Hello, Deyanira. Good seeing you again. So with this introduction, I just wanted to pass it both to Lorena and Kasih to share some opening remarks for us and perspectives on the regions they're based in. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Ivana, will you share the screen or should I?
Yes, I will share.
So, as Ivana said, my name is Lorena Freitas. I work in ITDP Brazil, and I'm really glad to be here with you today discussing how cycling can be more inclusive for all. And I think that the first thing that we should take in our minds is that people are diverse and understand this diversity of needs is something that the planners should consider in the urban planning in all cities. So when we think about, for example, the mobility pattern comparing women and men, we can see there are some important differences. Like women has the work travel, but they are also have household activities and also activities related to care. So when we are able to prepare to improve our environment, to aggregate women, caregivers, people with disabilities that are invisible for some urban plannings in cities in the world, low-income people, older adults, kids, we are preparing a best environment for all of us. And as soon as we have more people cycling, we'll be able to see in our cities lower crash rates, reduced emission, an improvement in the air quality. But to make this dream come true, we should invest in infrastructure. We should invest in understand the needs of our population, first of all. Next, please. So here, I want to share with you the Brazilian example. Understand that it's just an example. In another cities, in another country, can have different circumstances, different contexts. But here in Brazil, some of the main important variables to understand the mobility patterns are income, race, and gender. And here I share with you these two charts from Mobilidados. Mobilidados is a data platform from ITDP. And here we can see these green balls as in the first chart, low-income people, and in the second chart as Black women. And the blue balls are the average of the population. So here we can see that in both cases, in all capitals that are being studied by Mobilidados, low-income people and Black women has less access for these infrastructures. And although this population are historically the population that more use bikes to commuting, we can see with this data that the investments are nowadays until being making in central areas or areas where people have a higher income. Next. But we also understand that we should use data, but also aggregate some more qualitative information. So a few years ago, we carried out this project called The Color of Mobility, that in general was trying to understand the impact of racism in mobility here in Brazilian cities. It was a journalistic project. So next, please. I'm sorry. And we had a discussion group just focused on cycling, and we asked for these people what kind of bike trips would they like to have to expand their ride to the city. And as you can see here in this cloud of words, is that access work using bikes is more than a desire. This is a necessity. And there are also other activities that they would like to access, like access to culture, healthcare, study, leisure space like parks. And there were also two things that I want to highlight in this cloud. There is the necessity of having integration between bikes and public transportation, and also the necessity of having infrastructure in streets where the flow of cars is too heavy. Next one, and the last one, I think, yeah. And in this project, we also carried out some interviews with experts. And here I share with you this interview we've made with Glaucia Pereira. Glaucia Pereira is a researcher that produces data about mobility, and Jamile Santana. Jamile Santana works with, among other things, teaching women to ride. And our idea was discuss why here in Brazil, Black girls don't learn to cycle, because this is a reality that we deal every day here. And there are these highlights of this interview that show us that buying a bike isn't so expensive as buying a car, for example, but it can be too expensive for some families. And when some families has the opportunity of have a bike, it is more common to be used by the men to access opportunities in the city because they don't have money to pay the fare to use the public transport. So adding to this lack of infrastructure, this lack of security to ride, we see that girls are not learning, Black girls are not learning to cycle here. And to finish my presentation, I just want to say that this is more than just take a bike and ride. This can be a part of this autonomy building, especially for these more vulnerable groups like women, Black women. So I have here this quote from Jamile Santana that says, I had a student who was assaulted by her husband. She saw the poster for our projects and decided to sign up. She took 2 more classes, learned to cycle, left her husband, and started living with her daughter. So sometimes this is a bike, in this case, for example, is not just an activity. This is a tool to have a healthy life, to have a safe life. So I think this is my contribution for the discussion today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lorena. I'll take over from now and I'll try to share what we've been doing in Indonesia. Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie. I'm from ITDP Indonesia, and we've also I'd like to share as well about the case study of Indonesia. So we in ITDP Indonesia, we've been studying a lot when it comes to, we've done a lot of studies when it comes to cycling and cycling infrastructure, but we've noticed one thing during all like our surveys or data collection is that there was a very, very low participation amongst women. So one of the main surveys that we've done in 2021, which was the bike boom during the pandemic, there was an increase in cyclists, but when we captured, when we tried to see the cyclists, we tried to gather data, we found out that only 12 respondents of the 12% of the respondents were women. And so, you know, we found out that this, you know, this must not be the case, you know. And so the possibility was, one, maybe women in Indonesia don't cycle, or two, they just have a different pattern when it comes to cycling. And that was actually the case, because we further did other studies and we found that yes, women do cycle, but their pattern is much different. They might not use these large roads, they cycle more in the neighborhood area. And so we have to think about gathering data differently if we want to capture more of these unseen cyclists. And in this case, we started from women cyclists. So we found out that basically these traditional surveys or methods did not capture the barriers or needs of cyclists from vulnerable groups. Next. And so we did a study, which it's called Wheels of Change. In Indonesia, where we try to gather more data from these vulnerable cyclists, especially women cyclists. That's where we started first. And first, we tried to go back a little bit and see the data that we already have, because when we did gather data before, we'd always ask the question about gender. And from there we already had data, but we could not, you know, come to this conclusion of, okay, this is what women need, because we still had very little data. So we focused more on interviews, and we interviewed a bunch of women from various ages. So we had children, we had older people, different regions of Indonesia, different occupational backgrounds, and also different cycling purposes. So we had women who travel to work, or women who travel for leisure with their families, or women who used cycling to deliver goods. And so we had a bunch of different women, and then that was the main part of this study, basically. Next. And so this is actually a really nice infographic that we made, which captured like different types of cyclists that we captured. Basically, we even had cyclists with disabilities, you know, different cyclists who have different characteristics. Some prefer to cycle alone or with groups. And so we found barriers amongst these women from, you know, the lack of access towards bicycle. And maybe Lorena also touched upon that the access towards bicycle is already a very big challenge. And then the next one is the lack of safe cycling infrastructure. You know, maybe, you know, when it comes to protected bike lanes, we have very few, but, you know, sometimes even the roads are already a difficult challenge. Lack of security, lack of supporting cycling infrastructure, such as bike sharing. different needs for women. They've mentioned that they need to carry more items, or they have multiple different points, different activities throughout their days. So they need to carry more items. Unsupportive environmental conditions. And also when it comes to women who want to start, they also mentioned the intimidation that cycling is still a male-dominated activity, so they don't have this community. And so I'd like to bring this back to how do we get cycling to be more inclusive for all? And I think both Lorena and I would really touch upon this, and I think our amazing speakers today will also touch upon this and explain more. But we've talked about data, also the need to include more of these vulnerable communities when planning these infrastructure programs. Communities and group rides may also help for beginners. And also lastly, of course, safe cycling infrastructure, protected bike lanes, bike sharing programs, and also even e-bikes. And so I think I'll wrap up for our little introduction, and I'll directly pass on to our first panelist, which is Kay from Wheels of Wellbeing.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. And hopefully you can see my slides. So, as already said, my name is Kay Incull, and I work for an organisation based in the UK called Wheels for Wellbeing. Wheels for Wellbeing are a disabled people's organisation. That means we are run by and for disabled people. And there's two aspects to the work that we do. The first is that we provide access to cycling for disabled people through a fleet of more than 250 non-standard cycles. We also provide lead rides and a free loan scheme for people who want to borrow a cycle for a longer period of time. We also have the campaigns and policy part of our organisation, which is where I work, and we campaign with organisations, local and national government, to ensure all policy and infrastructure around cycling is accessible to and includes disabled people. And we provide a whole range of resources for free on our website, so everybody has the opportunity to make sure cycling is accessible. And we do all of this within the ethos of what we call mobility justice. And for us, mobility justice is about making sure resources are targeted towards those who currently have the least access to transport and mobility, rather than continually providing more opportunities and more resources to those who are already well served or who have the most mobility privilege. So in the UK, 20% of the population are disabled, and yet there remain economic, mobility, health and social inequalities. So I've got quite a busy slide of data summing some of those issues up. But in short, there is still a significant pay and employment gap for disabled people. And there are also additional costs of being disabled of around £1,000 a month. So this means that disabled people are much more likely to live in income poverty than any other population group. Disabled people also face significant transport and mobility inequalities. So the majority of mobility impaired disabled people don't have a suitable mobility aid to complete a 1 kilometre journey. And obviously that is access to your local shops, health centre, but that's also access to your local public transport. And across all transport types in the UK, disabled people make 38% less journeys than non-disabled people because of the inaccessibility of transport. So given that disabled people live in poverty and face inequalities in terms of transport and mobility, it's probably not a surprise to hear that there are significant health inequalities. And we really saw that in the pandemic, where 60% of COVID deaths in England were disabled people. And finally, there are also social inequalities. So there is still a great deal of stigma, prejudice and hostility towards disabled people. And only 56% of disabled people feel safe and welcome in their local community, let alone going further afield. However, for us, At Wheels Wellbeing, cycling is the solution to all of these. It's a form of autonomous transport and mobility. It provides physical activity, which has mental and physical health benefits. It's a form of social and leisure participation. The improved health and mobility can improve education and employment opportunities. It's a low or zero carbon form of transport, which is especially important given that in climate breakdown, we know disabled people are some of the first to experience the worst effects and to be least likely planned for in emergency provision. Cycling also provides access to nature and green spaces. And lastly, it's fun. There is no other transport that provides the joy and the thrill of cycling in all weathers. And this is something that our research participants talk about in terms of all of these issues. So one participant says, I find it hugely enabling to cycle around for transport and my commute. It keeps me active and mobile, prevents degenerative decline in my muscles, and makes me feel good about myself. And our research shows as well that not only does cycling provide all of these benefits, for many disabled people, it is an essential form of mobility. So we ask in our survey of disabled people which they find easier, cycling or walking, and nearly 2/3 state that cycling is easier than walking, and less than 10% say walking is easier than cycling. So for many disabled people, even a regular standard two-wheel bike can provide essential mobility. And again, there's a couple of quotes from our participants that illustrate this. So one of them says, I have spinal issues and can't walk any real distance, but I cycle on a normal bike without problem. It gives me my independence. Another person said, I have had MS, that's multiple sclerosis, for 30 years, and I wish I had realised earlier that I could cycle much better than I could walk. So even a basic bicycle can provide essential mobility, but it's also really important to remember once you enter an area where cycling is forbidden or impossible because of infrastructural barriers, it's taking away essential mobility for disabled people. So one of the things that we are campaigning for and hoping to see legal change in the UK is the recognition of cycles as mobility aids for disabled people and having them recognised on the same footing as walking sticks or wheelchairs or mobility scooters. There is some international precedent that supports this. So, for example, the World Health Organization, in its list of assistive technologies, describes a range of mobility aids, which are listed on the slide. But crucially for us, one of those is a tricycle. So they recognise a tricycle as a mobility aid for disabled people. And secondly, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities also, for us, supports disabled people cycling as mobility. So it says signatory nations are legally bound to fulfil the obligations regarding personal mobility and the provision of mobility devices. And this includes taking, quote, effective measures to ensure personal mobility with the greatest possible independence for persons with disabilities and facilitating their mobility in, quote, a manner and at a time of their choice. So we think this is really strong support for recognising cycling as essential mobility for disabled people. However, there are still really significant barriers to disabled people cycling, and our research constantly throws up the same barriers in the same list of impact. So the number one barrier is inaccessible cycle infrastructure, and this can be cycleways which are too narrow for a non-standard cycle, cycleways that require people to lift their cycle on and off, or a whole range of access barriers that if you can't lift your bicycle into that space, then you can't use it. Secondly is parking and storage, so safe, accessible places for disabled people to store their cycle both at home and at destinations. And this is particularly important given the third barrier, which is cost. So a non-standard cycle such as an e-trike, a hand cycle, a tandem, a recumbent in the UK will retail at a minimum of £4,000, but you're usually looking at least £8,000 and possibly more. And in the context of disabled people being more likely to live in poverty, that's a double barrier. We also see that where there are cycle share or hire schemes, there are not accessible vehicles for disabled people, so they're not able to access these low-cost share and hire schemes. And we also hear reported that there is still public hostility to disabled people cycling. The next slide has some pictorial illustrations of those, but I'm going to skip past that just to mention one of the areas where our work has had some significant impact. So over the years, we have been producing a guide to inclusive cycling. We set up the Beyond the Bicycle Coalition and also had a campaign called Bash the Barriers. And this was really about challenging those infrastructural barriers that prevent disabled people and others using non-standard cycles, so say parents cycling with a child carrier or so on, from accessing cycle infrastructure. And we were really pleased that in 2020, the government in the UK produced a document called LTM 120, and this had cycle infrastructure standards that should be applied throughout the country and which are overseen by a body called Active Travel England. And within that, one of the things they produced was what is called a cycle design vehicle. And the dimensions of that are an incorporation of every kind of non-standard cycle. So that a drawing from that document is on the screen. And that includes a side-by-side tandem, a back-to-front tandem, a wheelchair carrier, cargo trike. So it demands that all infrastructure can accommodate those cycles, is big enough to manage that. So in turning spaces, in junctions, in the width. So that's been an amazing step forward in terms of accessible infrastructure, but there have been regional variations in the UK in terms of the implementation of these standards and compliance with them. So part of our work remains ensuring that where we see new cycle infrastructure is designed, it retains these standards from design to implementation to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to cycle. So that's all from me. There's a quick flash of our website and my email if you have any questions, and you can also find us on social media. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Hila.
Thank you, Kay. This was so interesting. So thank you for sharing. It's a hard act to follow, but I think a lot of it really relates to what I'm going to talk about as well. So let me share my screen, but not with everyone, just a slideshow. So good morning. It's very early here in California. My name is Hila Bonner. I'm a program associate for the Streets for Kids team at Global Designing Cities Initiative. So in GDCI, we partner with cities from around the world to transform streets that put people first. We do this through different programs. The Streets for Kids program specifically tries to improve the health and well-being and safety of children of all ages and abilities on their streets. And we do this by leveraging our policy and design guidance, so the Global Street Design Guide and its supplements that you can check out online. And we use this sort of leveraging of this knowledge from around the world to transform streets from those you can see here, sort of like a place where caregivers and kids sort of scramble to get to their destinations, to those where they can really enjoy the benefits of great public spaces. So we focus specifically on mobility and independent mobility in the case of older children and teens, but also creating spaces to pause and stay on our streets. Like this project from Lyon from last year. And this project from Istanbul that created much needed new public space for a school community to come and gather and join together and play and even cycle sometimes. And I'm saying this like very carefully, even cycle, because in a lot of cities that we work with and are totally devoted to creating better streets for kids, cycling for all is still a very challenging topic. And I think there are probably like many reasons for this. One reason that I wanted to highlight is sort of like the way that we imagine the cyclist. And I feel like a lot of the times we imagine these guys, and that's understandable. These are the people that we usually see on the street, like even in very dangerous conditions or with minimal infrastructure that exists. So those are the people that we count and we observe. To be honest, it's also easier to plan for these people because they don't require as much attention, as much resources as other people do. But we want to focus on these users as well. So caregivers and children and teens to ride and be welcomed on our cycling infrastructure. And that does require more work, more attention, more resources to create a network that is safe and comfortable and connected and direct. It doesn't have to be the most expensive infrastructure. We can sometimes talk about doing interim or temporary materials as well. But it does require us to prioritize some things like wide and protected facilities, safe intersections, and a complete network. So if you want to start moving towards this vision, we really need to start talking about dimension. And I know Kay mentioned this as well. So in this case, we can talk about the fact that kids have different dimensions from adults, of course, but also the vehicles vary for caregivers or for other abilities as well. Kids and families tend to ride slower, so they reach shorter destinations, another consideration to have. And we want to see different behaviors, right? So we talked about people riding side by side in pairs, if it's a mom and a kid, even teens riding in groups. So sometimes they need to stop and wait for each other. So these are the type of behaviors that we want to see and we want to accommodate as well. Caregivers riding with groceries, trying to maneuver, and teens riding in ways that are sort of playful and maybe even carefree. We also need to talk about different destinations, and I think some of the speakers already touched on this, but having different destinations and sort of like a very complex path to travel throughout the city. And it all really brings us to the conclusion that if we want to focus on creating safe spaces for kids and caregivers to ride, we really need to talk about an area and sort of like a complete network. So this network would have long-range connections that are fully separated for long distances. Same goes for main streets that have speeds that are higher than 30 kilometers per hour, that have higher traffic volumes. We need separated infrastructure for that as well. And for shared cycle street that are below 30 kilometers per hour and that can have lower traffic volumes as well. But we do need to design this carefully in order for this to work. So really, this is a combination of safe facilities, like the ones that we discussed, but also traffic management tools that make it so that traffic volumes are reduced, speeds are lowered, and access is sort of controlled around the city. And I really wanted to sort of finish with like what a city eye vision of this could be, because we can go into the technicalities, but strategic thinking is also very important. And I think a great resource that we have in GDCI is the BC program. So BC is a competitive grant program that sort of tries to encourage innovative thinking with cycling infrastructure around the world. Last year, 10 cities joined out of 200 applicants with very bold visions of what the cycling infrastructure could be. And then out of those, I was happy to see that half of them actually saw their innovation and bringing more people into their cycling infrastructure, and specifically having kids join and feel comfortable as well. So one example for this is from Lisbon, Portugal, with the School Missing Links connection that I wanted to show because I think it's a really interesting case for this network approach. So Lisbon actually has quite an extensive building of its cycling infrastructure, in the last 2 decades. And it saw its next stage in sort of bringing in more users and inviting kids to join the cycling network as well and the cycling culture. They started doing soft measures like temporary school streets and bike trains to school programs, and even engagement morning where they come to schools and talk to the kids and engage them and build their skills and capacity and confidence. And in the BC program, they focused on getting those last mile connections between schools and the existing cycling networks. So really talking about filling in those networks with all of the different tools that we were discussing to make sure they are connected and can be part of the city. And this is just one example from a lot of cities that are trying to step up their game and bring more kids into this culture. So thank you. I'm gonna finish with that and invite the next speaker.
Thank you, Gila. And we have Deyanira, who is last but not least.
Muy buenos días a todos y todas. Espero
Good
que me
morning,
estén
everyone.
escuchando muy
I
bien.
hope you can hear me well.
Creo que un tema y un punto muy relevante es que hoy podemos
I
ver
think
más mujeres
that
hablando de
an
bicicleta.
important thing is that today we are more women talking about cycling. We didn't see that a decade ago. Thank you, everyone. My name is Deyanira Avila, and for over a decade, I have worked in promoting the use of bicycles. I want to show you the case of Bogota, a wonderful city that has been able to build a clear policy and line on how more women, more children, and more people with disabilities and more elders see bicycles not only as a vehicle to commute, but also to have more freedom and to enjoy the city. For those of you who don't know Bogota, Bogota is a city with about 9 million people. Every day, about 14 million trips are made. It's a huge city, and for over a decade, we have worked with different mayors in an attempt to make the city a more bike-friendly city. With everything that our previous panelists have said, safer city with more infrastructure, with all complementary services, cycling for women. It's funny when you start working in this topic and you see a lot of engineers that haven't used a bike at all. It's very hard to start planning and defining a cycling system when you never have used such a vehicle. We have been able to break that ceiling, and today we are more women working out that infrastructure for Bogota. The first thing we have done is that we have built over 630 kilometers of bike lanes, exclusive bike lanes. I use these lanes a lot. We have over 69,000 bicycles parking spots. We had an issue with security because we didn't have parking spaces. And this opened the doors at a very difficult time, which was COVID. We were able to draft a master plan, a 2021-2039 master plan with 2.2 billion pesos with 44 goals for Bogota. One of the latest projects that enabled that inclusion and that assisted in addressing those care trips is the bike share system. It was a great achievement. And we wrote it in our policy. No matter how small an effort, we will achieve a significant change in mobility. Once again, I'm one of those advocates. I move around the city in a bicycle, and I still believe it's the best way to do so. Let's understand how Bogota commutes. These are data from 2023. Out of those 14 million trips, we have 1.2 million made on bike every day, men and women. Of course, more men, and we want to change that. We want to reach balanced numbers. The city is actually the right place or the right area for us to move around in a bicycle. In fact, we have a lot of neighboring towns and people arrive in their bikes. This effort needs to continue so we can continue having that transformation that Lorena mentioned, better air quality, better health conditions for all of us, and thus be a more equitable city where women and children feel safe riding bikes in our city. This didn't just start a decade ago. Bogota has a long-standing love story with the bicycles. For about 50 years now, we have had an event every Sunday. Over 127 kilometers of roads, car roads, are closed and Bogotan people can go out and enjoy these public spaces. People go out and ride their bikes, children, women, people with disabilities, and we take over the public space. It's called the Ciclovia, the Sunday Ciclovia. It's a space owned by Bogotanos. We are used to say that Bogota doesn't have an ocean view, but it does have bicycles. As a result of this love story with the bike and this recreational perspective, we construct these policies and this infrastructure. And today, more Bogotano people can use their bikes. But that's not the end of it. It's not just a love story. It's also the result of a series of programs that, as Lorena mentioned or Kashis mentioned, we need to offer more things. We need to invite all groups, boys, girls, adults, women. We need to invite everyone to use the city. That's why since 2012, local administration created this wonderful program called Al Colegio en Bici, or Ride Your Bike to School. It's currently positioned. It has been around for over 12 years. We have over 124 routes. In December, we commissioned the latest routes, even from coming in from rural areas, and we bring children in bicycle in bikes, and we accompany and protect them. During the pandemic, we added something called Bici Parceros, or cycling allies. After children are leave school in the afternoon, children said, "Hey, I want to continue riding my bike." And we added a series of polygons to provide support to another group of children or teenagers, perhaps, where overall we are serving over 24,000 children with over 3 million trips. It's part of an institutional effort. And as we mentioned, this is not just a matter of a political heart. It also takes investment. And the local administration has provided the resources for these children to use their bicycles and thus make this a lifestyle, moving around in bicycles. This is another significant and relevant exercise in making a more inclusive city. As you all know, Bogota adopted the care system. We need to take care of those who took care of us, our mothers, those who take care of our parents or of our children, and those who haven't had a chance of a better quality of life. As we heard during the previous presentations, people taking care trips are the ones that have the most issues mobility. That's why we have the bike sharing system launched since 2022. So it has been operating for over a year now. And we have been able to have the world's first bike sharing system with 3 characteristics. First, it offers a series of bicycles for people with disabilities, hand cycles. It's a patented design for Bogota. The second one is 150 bikes with chairs for children. During our surveys, we learned that women didn't use bicycles because they didn't have how to carry or to bring their small children. We offer bicycles with these characteristics and 150 cargo bikes. As I said, women make the largest amount of care trips. We go to buy groceries, bring the laundry, bring our kids. So we have 3,300 bicycles around a specific zone in Bogota, and it open mobility. And it makes bicycles an option for those of us who have never thought of using the bicycle for our mobility, people with disabilities and women in care activities. It has been very successful. We have over 1.7 million trips with a very significant and very nice condition. It's the first system in the world that has had the lowest level of theft or damage. This means that Bogotanos like and care for the system that takes care of them. For 8 years, we have an 8-year program to expand this with the operators that we have hired for that. Bogotanos said, hey, enhance this. So we have already established a series of projects to continue broadening the scope of this project. We want to make sure that a lot of people, or a lot more people, come over, women and children with different needs. We have also set up over 300 shops, repair shops, because we have 1.2 million trips, so people needed those repair shops, and we complemented them with bike parking spaces. So we have over 70,000 bike parkings. And this is not built just by decision makers. There's a very nice story here that is part of Bogota, and I think that's one of its strengths. Bogota has a group of collective groups, so to speak. Participation is very strong, and a lot of them have been advocates. We have a lot of advocates for bicycles. The people used to be more hostile to bike commuters. I understand everyone who says that cycling infrastructure is almost a war with the space for cars and other vehicles. We established a space for participation called the local bike councils. Our city is divided different localities or districts, and we have heard the voices, and we invite them from each district to share and help us draft our policies. And there are private groups that do it with no desire for retribution. And given their activism, they help in raising awareness about cyclists. I would love to tell you a bunch of stories. There has been years of struggle, and I believe that the recommendation for other cities who want to join programs like this is, first, allow women in planning and designing a city for us. And secondly, this is an everyday struggle. It's a never-ending struggle. We always need to gain more space to move in a better way. This is what will yield a better future for us. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure and an honor to have joined you today.
All right, thank you for all the presentations. I think now we go into the session where Lorena and I will ask questions towards the panelists, and I'll start with Kay. Kay focused previously on Wheels for Well-Being, highlighting cycling for people with disabilities. It's quite interesting because here in Indonesia, we also have had interviews as well with people with disabilities and how cycling benefited their mobility. One thing that was often addressed as well when we were interviewing people here in Indonesia was often bike lanes sort of inhibited their mobilities because of the larger space that they needed. So what specific types of infrastructure that you worked with has proven most effective in accommodating these cyclists with disabilities?
Yeah, infrastructure is key to making cycling more accessible, and some of the basic things are you need a wide space. So the UK standard is an absolute minimum of 1.5 meters wide for a single directional. I mean, really, that is a minimum, because if it's quite a busy cycle lane, people on larger cycles tend to go slower. So you need overtaking space for people on faster cycles. So wide, good quality, smooth surface. So asphalt is really good because it's smooth, it's quite grippy when it's wet. We like protected cycle lanes so people feel safe from motor traffic, and motor traffic can't sort of squash into the cycle lane, which obviously is really risky if you're on a wider cycle, but not curbed access, because once you put a step to one side or both sides of the cycle lanes, if for some reason you need to get out of the cycle lane, a disabled person isn't going to be able to do that. And one of the things we always tell people about infrastructure is people are like, oh, more width, it's going to be more expensive. But making cycling accessible for disabled people also makes it accessible for the rest of the population. So families with kids, older people using different kinds of cycles, cargo cycles. So it's actually, in the long term, it's a cost saving because you're doing something that makes it accessible for everybody, and then also saves you having to retrofit something later on. So yeah, it's surface, it's width, not having camber on it, not having stepped access, and good safe junctions, which has already been mentioned, where cycles have priority and cycle safety is designed in as a priority, because again, disabled people and people on larger cycles and also kids are going to be slower at getting across a junction and perhaps less likely to respond quickly to a hazard.
Yeah, thank you, Kay. So I highlighted a lot of things I wrote down, with smooth surfaces, junctions, many things. But yeah, I think a good point to mention was what you said earlier, making cycling safe for people with disabilities in the long run is making cycling safe for all, and it'll benefit not just people with disabilities, but everyone else who's cycling. I'd like to move on to the next to the next speaker, Hila. Yeah, so you touched a bit upon interim or temporary interventions. I'd like to ask, how do you make sure that cities are able to scale up these interventions or pilot projects and continue to support them also financially? Yeah, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So I had like a lot of slides in the back that I feel could be appropriate, but maybe I'll try to keep it short. So yeah, one thing that we always work with our cities when we partner together is sort of thinking about the evidence that we need to support a scale up, and sort of like also how to speak to different audiences. And I think one of the great things working on cycling projects and cycling for kids and caregivers is that it can meet different demands and different budgets. So really trying to think strategically about the type of data we collect and who we want to communicate this to. So it could be data about the health benefits, about road safety, about physical activity and education, and really trying to also, I think other people show this as well, but really trying to couple those type of counts and sort of quantitative information with testimonials and trying to really communicate the impact that those type of infrastructure changes make. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but we do see great projects that are able to scale up. So I would also encourage you to check out some of our case studies, like Bogota's presentation. I thought was just an amazing case study as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh. Thank you, Hila. Before we finish, I will make the final question for Dianira. First of all, I just want to say that your presentation were really inspirational, especially for me that live in Brazil, and thinking about a project like this happening in South America is something I was getting emotional seeing your presentation. And so I want to ask you a question that comes from the Q&A box sent by Reginald Ting that say, how do you convince local traffic officials that view cycling as a barrier to traffic flow? These same officials quickly capitulate the backlash from car users that are inconvenienced by cycling lanes. I'm so sorry.
Lorena, muchas gracias. Bienvenida a Bogotá cuando quieras.
Thank you, Lorena. You're welcome to Bogota. It's a wonderful city, and it's a wonderful city to bike around. It's a very interesting question. In fact, we will always have complaints. People will always complain. The advantage that we have is that 80% of the trips is made by sustainable mobility, i.e. public transit, bike, or on foot. Only 20% or less of the people are moving around in their private vehicle. However, we have a significant increase in the number of private vehicles. One of the achievements that you need to consider is we generated a scheme of policies and regulations that protected the right or they guaranteed the right to take over some more spaces to give them to cyclists. We used GNCI standards and international benchmarks, and based on that, Bogota built its own regulations. That was very helpful in order to protect each one of the bike lane stretches that we built, and it has a very significant issue here. A lot of cyclists died when they rode along with other vehicles. We were able to show that we were able to reduce fatalities or deaths to zero whenever we build dedicated cycling infrastructure. So it's not a matter of, so it involves a series of new regulations and manuals, in addition to a series of measurements of air quality impact, improvements in mobility, reduced congestions, and what best than reducing deaths by traffic accidents. That allowed us to enhance our network. In our mobility plan, we were able to draft 1,200 cycling lanes for our bike riders. It's not an easy task. People will always be will oppose, will complain because people always advocate for more space for private vehicles. But it also involves the political will and the purpose of each mayor to protect the rights of those who are most vulnerable. In our case, Bogota has an amazing cycling potential. It's more people who ride bikes, and we will continue to defend our spaces to be able to ride in a safe way.
So I'll pass to Ivona to wrap up the webinar.
Thank you so much. And we're magically at time. Obviously, we didn't have a chance to get into all the questions, but hopefully this just gives a snippet of what everyone is doing around making cycling for all. And it's generally great to see different sectors coming together, different partners, and hearing perspectives to discuss common challenges. I think it's very important. So my job is just to wrap this up. I really thank Lorena and Cassie for leading this this webinar and the presentations and questions, and of course, Kay, Hila, and Deyanira. So everyone stay tuned for more webinars from us and partners around these issues and other issues, of course, around urban mobility. Stay tuned through social media or emails for more. And with that, I'll just close it off. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. Take care, everyone.